One of the more subtle ego dramas is the idea that God made a mistake. And this is something I had to grapple with quite a bit to really wrap my head around it when I first came across this concept. And so it might require a little contemplation as well. But what we can start with is it's the idea that we have these beings that I call fallen beings. And they are deliberately and aggressively trying to put us in this catch-22 that we can't get out of. Because in our own minds, we are, there's an enigma, a riddle that we can't resolve, and it paralyzes us. And one of the ways they do this is through this idea that God made a mistake. And they use, in order to do this, they use what the Ascended Masters have called serpentine logic. And this is a reference to the Old Testament, to Genesis, where there's the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And they have been told that they can eat of all of the fruits in the garden except one tree, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And then the serpent comes and tempts them, even though it's described as Eve, it's really both of them were tempted. And the serpent uses this logic. It says, "Thou shalt not surely die." And this paralyzes their mind, so they decide to eat of the forbidden fruit. And what the Masters explain is that the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil is actually a symbol for the duality consciousness. Because it's the duality consciousness that has this entire idea that there's something that's good and something that's evil, and they are relative concepts that you can define. And what does the serpent say? "Ye shall not surely die, you shall become as a God, knowing good and evil." In other words, the serpent is saying that when you eat the forbidden fruit, the duality consciousness, you are like a God because you can define what's good and evil. And that's what the fallen beings believe. And the only way to avoid being paralyzed by this kind of logic is the Christ mind, the one mind that is always united. Because what the one mind gives you is a frame of reference that there's something outside duality. You see, when you step into duality, you may think you are defining what's good and evil, but you're only doing so in relative terms. What you define as good is in opposition to something that's evil. So your definition is not absolute, it's not the ultimate truth, it's just relative. But you are elevating it to the status of being the ultimate truth, and that's what the fallen beings are doing. The fallen beings are using the duality consciousness to create a certain worldview. They define that this is the absolute truth, and then they're seeking to make it absolute by getting all people on earth to accept it. And they think that if all people accept it, God will have to, validate them, put them in charge of the universe, give them eternal life, whatever they think. But it's a completely flawed reasoning, because the Christ mind doesn't actually operate with the concepts of good and evil. The Christ mind operates with, does it come from oneness or does it come from separation, from duality? And it just sees very clearly what is from separation and what is from oneness. Here's an idea based on the oneness of all life. Here's an idea based on the illusion that life can be divided up and separated. And this illusion, of course, comes from the fact that everything has form. But it's very important to realize that, as I've said in many of my non-duality videos, that differentiation is not the same as duality. The fact that you have a circle and a square has not created a duality. This is just form that's differentiated. But what the fallen beings do with the duality consciousness is they are imposing a value judgment. Essentially, you could say they're defining that a circle is good and a square is evil. This is actually what the Catholic Church did in the Middle Ages, because they said the perfect form is a circle, and therefore the sun and all the heavenly bodies must be moving around the earth in perfect circles. So this is just an example of this. So the serpentine logic is always relative, and that is why the serpentine logic it has created this image, or the fallen beings, by using this logic, they created this image that God must have made a mistake. And you see it in, for example, Christianity. Here you have a God who's portrayed as being all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good. Yet, people need to be saved. And if they are not saved, then they will go to hell and God will destroy the world. But what could prevent people from being saved? It is that God has an opponent, the devil, who are trying to fool people and take them to hell. So you see how illogical it is that an all-good, all-knowing, and all-powerful God could make a mistake and create the devil, or create us in a state of sin from which we need to be saved. Why would an all-knowing God do this? What could possibly be the purpose? So when you tune into the Christ man, you can see how illogical this is. But when you are in the consciousness of separation, this seems completely logical. And as I've said in my previous talks, the reason why we are fooled by this serpentine logic of the fallen beings is that our ego is created out of duality. And so the serpentine logic, which is based on duality, it offers the ego an advantage. Or rather, it seems like an advantage to the ego. It isn't to us. But it is to the ego because it keeps the ego alive. So one advantage here is there is God who created me as a sinner, and there's the devil who's trying to take me to hell. I'm not really responsible. What can I do? Well, I can pray to God, I can believe in God and hope that God will save me. But it wasn't really my own choice that got me in the state of consciousness I'm in right now. And this is perfect for the ego, because then you are not recognizing the very fact that I've talked about in previous videos, that the only way to get out of your present state of mind is to make more aware choices than the choices that cause you to go into your present state of mind. So, what we see when we consider this drama is that the fallen beings have created the sense that there is a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good. But even though he's all-powerful, he isn't really all-powerful because he has an opponent called the devil. And therefore, we human beings, we need to help God correct the mistake that God made by allowing the devil or creating us in a state of sin. And it may even require us to wage war against another group of people whose minds have been taken over by the devil. They are working to carry out the devil's plan of destroying the world and taking people to hell, and we need to be on God's side, and we need to kill and defeat those people who are working for the devil. Then we are doing God's work by actually killing God's people. You see how throughout history that has led to warfare. You used to see it in the Crusades, the massacre of the Cathars, the Inquisition, the witch hunts. It's estimated that the Christian religion, through these events, has killed, there are different estimates, but at least 1 million people, and some say more, many more. So how is this logical when you consider that Jesus said, do good to those that hate you, turn the other cheek, love your enemies? How could a religion that is based on Jesus' teachings ever be used to justify killing other people? Well, because of the serpentine logic that created this epic drama that Christians have to correct God's mistake. Now, I realize Christians don't see that, they don't acknowledge that God has made a mistake, but this is what they are actually acting on. And so, what is behind this? Well, what is behind it is that I've talked about fallen beings who have been allowed to come to Earth. And I have other videos, like my video about how the world was created, where I talk about why this was allowed. So I'm not going to go into that here. But what we see is that the fallen beings are trapped in the duality consciousness. And the duality consciousness always has two polarities. So as a result of this, the fallen beings have actually separated themselves into two groups. And there's one group of fallen beings who are doing what is obviously evil. They are attacking other people, they're killing other people, they are waging war, they have created wars on Earth and taught people how to create war, which wasn't there before the fallen beings came to Earth. And so they're doing all these. So really what they're doing, they're playing the role of the devil. Then there's another group of fallen beings who have set themselves up as the good guys, the ones who are here to save us from the other group of fallen beings by being our leaders who are the good leaders, even religious leaders. So you see how this becomes a catch-22, because what is the cause of evil on Earth? Well, it's the aggressive group of fallen beings, the openly aggressive. But what is it that the good group of fallen beings have done? They have presented themselves as the saviors who can save us from the other group of fallen beings. But see, both groups are in the duality consciousness. And how is someone who is in the duality consciousness going to save us from the duality consciousness? It can't be done. The only thing that can get us out of the duality consciousness is the one mind, the Christ mind. And so you see here that all of these epic dramas, they're all defined out of duality. And they will never lead us out of duality. They will never make us free from duality. So take the two groups of fallen beings. They are, of course, not as blunt as what I've described here, even though some are obviously aggressive and evil, but they all present themselves that they have a positive agenda. Now, you can look back today, as I've said so many times, that I grew up to see Hitler as the ultimate evil. But Hitler didn't present himself as the ultimate evil. He presented himself as a good force that was going to actually save humanity by purifying the human race. So, throughout the ages, many people have pulled into supporting one of these fallen beings. Now, Hitler was obviously very aggressive and willing to kill millions of people to further his agenda. So this, you could say that even though he didn't present himself that way, he represents that group of fallen beings. But then there are other fallen beings who have set themselves up as good people, religious leaders, political leaders, philosophers, scientists, whatever. And they are claiming that they can save us from the other group of fallen beings, which is, for example, medieval Christian leaders, the popes and so forth, who were saying that it was necessary to kill the Muslims to basically correct God's mistake and defeat the devil. So what is important to see about this is that if we allow ourselves to follow one of these groups of fallen beings, we are, number one, not getting out of duality ourselves. We're actually reinforcing the ego and the dualistic selves, because we are putting our attention on this epic struggle. We are feeding our energies into it. We are taking actions based on it, therefore creating karma. We are basically tying ourselves to the fallen beings. And the other thing that happens is that we're not helping to free the earth from the duality consciousness or the fallen beings. We're not helping to free humanity. So you have this old saying, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. Well, as long as we engage in this dualistic struggle, doesn't matter which side we side with, we're part of the problem. We're only perpetuating the duality consciousness. And so what we're here to do as spiritual people is, first of all, free ourselves from this epic struggle of the fallen beings, but also demonstrate to other people that we can rise above it and we can refuse to take part in it. And this, has many subtle ramifications, but it is really a matter of realizing the basic dynamic here, that the fallen beings always try to define things in dualistic terms. There's an opposite. And there are two opposites that are struggling, and one has to win and the other has to lose. Otherwise, some epic calamity occurs. And really behind it all is this idea that God made a mistake. And when you understand the fallen beings a little more closely, you see that what they are really trying to do is to neutralize our free will and make people blindly follow them, either one group of fallen beings or the other. I'm not saying that the fallen beings, the two groups of fallen beings, they are consciously, deliberately cooperating, because they are really divided. But nevertheless, they are still working towards the same goal of getting people to engage in the epic struggle. And they do this, of course, with the duality consciousness, the serpentine logic. And so we, as spiritual people, we have to come to see through this, and the only way to see through it is really the Christ mind. Of course, the Ascended Masters are giving a lot of teachings based on this, but it really is a matter of you connecting to the Christ mind in yourself, so that it's not a matter of just intellectually understanding this, but it's a matter of having that inner, intuitive, mystical experience where you realize that this is all duality. And the way you realize this is to experience what I've talked about in many videos, that the core of your being is the conscious you. And the conscious you is pure awareness, neutral awareness. That means the conscious you is not defined by any form. And therefore, when you experience that, you can look at the dualistic struggle and you can see the dualistic struggle is defined in the world of form. It's defined based on this consciousness that there are two polarities, and one of them is good and one of them is evil. And this is the basic epic struggle that's perpetuated or projected out there by the fallen beings, that God made a mistake and human beings need to correct it. And it's really based on the fact that the fallen beings don't respect free will. And I won't go into that too much here, because I've talked about it in several other videos, but the goal of the universe is that we are expanding our consciousness until we reach the greater consciousness. And expanding consciousness can only happen because we have self-awareness and we have free will. So we have the ability to make choices and evaluate the consequences of those choices. And it's by doing that, experimenting with our free will, evaluating the consequences of our choices, that we raise our awareness, that we grow in awareness. And if we didn't have free will or freedom of will, we couldn't grow, and that's the purpose of the universe. But see, the fallen beings have rebelled against that purpose. And they are seeking to attain something, some ultimate status in this world. You see, the goal of the universe is, we start out with this very point-like sense of self, we gradually expand our sense of self through many levels until we reach the greater consciousness. But the fallen beings don't want to do that. They want to attain some ultimate status in the world of form. In other words, they have disconnected themselves from the Christ mind and the awareness that the conscious you is beyond form, and therefore they are seeking to attain an ultimate status in the world of form. And that, of course, is an impossibility. It can't happen. because we're in an undescended sphere, as I explained in my video about how the world was created. So the fallen beings have, in essence, they have neutralized their own free will. Because when you are trapped in duality, and you always see things in terms of there's one polarity and there's an opposite polarity, you think you have to choose one or the other. And that's the dilemma that the fallen beings are trying to put us in. We think there are only two options, and we have to choose one or the other, good versus over evil. But the Christ mind can see that both of these options are defined based on duality, and none of them are ultimate. And it's when you connect to that one mind that you can make a free choice to reject both of the dualistic extremes, instead of thinking you have to choose one. But the fallen beings have gone into separation. They have lost the connection to the one mind. They don't realize that they are neutral beings, that the consciousness is beyond form. So they are trying to create a form-based self and elevate it to the status of having absolute power and being immortal. But of course, as I've explained in How the World Was Created, nothing in an unascended sphere that we're in will ever be immortal. And so the fallen beings then, what have they done? Well, they have created this image that there's an all-powerful God. But this is a fantasy. But it's an image based on what they want to achieve in this world. They want to achieve the status of being all-powerful in the world of form. But it can't be done. And why am I saying that God, the Creator, is not all-powerful? Well, because God has given us free will. And therefore, God has said, I'm not going to be all-powerful in an undescended sphere, because you have your free will to experiment. It's an unascended sphere. It can't become permanent. Therefore, there is no danger in giving you free will in an unascended sphere. There is nothing that could happen in an unascended sphere, nothing you could do with your free will that could ever become permanent. So you can make any choice you want, see the consequences, learn from the consequences. It doesn't matter what choices you make as long as you learn. So it's like, again, when you see this, when you see the value of free will, the necessity of free will, you see that God couldn't make a mistake. God never made a mistake. The fallen beings are trying to say it was a mistake to give people free will. We should be in charge of the universe, and then we'll get everybody to be saved. But it's not a matter of saving people. It's a matter of them growing. And you grow by exercising your free will, not by following the fallen beings blindly. That's what Jesus called the blind leading the blind. And they both end up in the ditch, either on this side or on that side, in the dualistic polarity. So, what we need to realize in order to free ourselves from these epic dramas is that God has not made a mistake. And it's only the fallen beings who have defined this fantasy, that there is the angry, judgmental God in the sky. Again, they're angry and judgmental, and therefore they are projecting that this is what God is like, because they're projecting that God is like them, or rather, they are gods. And that's what we have to see through and see that what we are formless beings, and God is formless, or at least beyond form. And therefore, we don't have to believe in all of these form-based dualistic ideas that the fallen beings have come up with.